Welcome back. Part two.
Part two, man.
Yeah. So I have what I told you before. I was kind of wrestling with the idea of mentioning the fact that we did record another one before this and some technical issues came up and we're doing it again, which was really hard for me.
Right.
Because, booking this place, getting all the people here, getting you here, spending 2.5 hours during that interview it meant a lot to me. And I really thought that interview was like really, really fruitful. I loved it. So for the next couple weeks, I kept beating myself up over and over and over again. And I recall one thing you said in that podcast about you going down this spiral.
Right.
I forget what you called it, what you talked about, but I recognized it when I was doing it. I was just like, I'm just digging myself into a deeper and deeper hole.
Right.
And something I realized was I feel as though I'm pretty good at forgiving people, but I suck at forgiving myself on mistakes.
Right.
Is that something that you also notice maybe within yourself? Is how do you deal with failure in moments and forgiveness of yourself?
I feel like I've learned to become perhaps a little bit better at it. Just because I've been, there's 2 or 3 moments in my life that I've sort of hit these moments of, I wouldn't even say failure, but perhaps a subjective rock bottom. Right. And the one time I sort of had a hard time getting out of it. And I sort of had a spiritual moment, a spiritual encounter, I would say, at sort of the depths of that time, during that time. And the thing that I learned during that time is that that on the way to the bottom, the way you sort of get yourself from the bottom, sometimes something can just trip you up. But it's not the thing that really takes you out. It just trips you up.
Right.
But the thing that trips you up, but then that thing can then take you to the bottom are the lies we tell ourselves. And those lies are often almost validated by the trip. The lies lie in the trip because maybe you said something and now someone said something, or you did something. I want to use a personal example. I did 3 music videos during a time that felt like, these are going to sort of change my career. Another lie, I think, as well, to even think that way. But I sort of sacrificed so much of my personal well-being, my family relationship at the altar of these 3 music videos. I realized I wasn't talking to my mom as much. I wasn't even communing with my family, my kids and my wife as much. They were all super supportive and didn't say anything, but I even realized within myself sort of my relationship to them and sort of my inner self was atrophying. And I was like, it's fine. It's I couldn't even really see that at the time. I just realized, these were almost like subconscious sacrifices that I was willing to make, just because, man, this thing that I was going to do for this artist, if that thing comes out and it's awesome, then that could be the change in my career. And anyway, so internally, I was sort of atrophying, and then 2 of those music videos went south, and so that was the trip. That was the one trip. The one artist didn't want the one music video to come out. And actually not the artist, actually. It wasn't the artist. It was the management, not the label, the management. And they didn't write the nicest things.
About the video?
About me.
Oh. Like you as a director or as a person?
I'll just sort of give the sort of the context.
Sure.
It was a film that didn't have a lot of money, and I put in, I think they had something like 10 grand. I put in an additional 30 grand.
Wow.
To make it happen, to shoot on film. And it was sort of a politically sensitive music video. The label sort of, I would say, gave me free reign. They were just, or not the label, the management, they were just there to sort of like see the artist, record when I was shooting the artist, make sure that the artist was captured well, and then sort of left me to my own devices. But because the nature of the content of the scenes that I was capturing sort of around the performance, very real, raw scenes, because they were sensitive, a lot of the cast felt like they didn't want certain things. I had to change things to be sensitive to just the way that certain scenes were
being portrayed.
And, it was something that I was like, I definitely want to do that, but the label or the management wasn't there for those. So when they finally saw the film, in some areas, it was sort of like different to what they saw. Perhaps all beside the point. I guess the point was just that there was sort of a personal attack, and I started believing that thing that was said about me, even though I feel like initially it was such an affront to me that like, oh, how can you say that? You start thinking, oh, is that who I am? And I have also realized I have no, I hate even saying that, I almost like hate the fact that I even told this story, because it really is no bad blood to the management. I've realized even within myself, that sort of is a cancer that can really erode my own soul. But the fact that I sort of took those words and I started believing them, and I started saying those things sort of about myself, and even the fact that, because there were two narratives. One, is that true about me? And then the other narrative is, I feel like such a victim. So, poor me.
Right.
Like, why is that happening to me? These are, again, things I wouldn't dare say, but sometimes you think that. I think that's even cancerous. Like, that was a cancer to my own soul. And that caused me to spiral. And it was sort of a word by my mom in sort of 3 months of this, where I was like going to sleep at 7 p.m. at night and waking up at 10 a.m. Like I just want to sleep. You just want to sort of sleep time away. And so a burnout, perhaps, a depression, perhaps, again, a subjective rock bottom, whatever you call it. I think for everyone, rock bottom looks different. For some people, they get strung out. For other people, you wouldn't even know, and they're carrying it so personally. But I guess it's just being at the end of yourself. And I went through two of those. I went through one, and then the other one was sort of on the way. I was heading there, and I realized...
While you were experiencing the first one already?
No. So 2 years
separate.
after.
Okay.
One was in 2018, and the one was in 2020 during the pandemic. Both related to work. Both grinding really hard, atrophying the inner man, because I'm just going. Relationally, spiritually, in all ways, I'm sort of atrophying the inner man. And then something trips you up. And then the first one, something tripped me up, and I believed the lie, and I sort of spiraled. And then the second one, it tripped me up, but I recognized that I'd been here before, and I'm not going to allow it to trip me up. And I'm going to believe the words of my mum, that you are beloved, that you are valuable, that you are worthy, which I think my mom, from her mouth, that's words to a son.
Sure.
But I think also from her mouth, it's like cosmically, even separate from me and your dad's imperfect love of you, that you are loved in a sort of cosmic way. And it was sort of when that happened in 2018 for the first time, I was like, oh, that's it. That's it. It restores my depleted value. It completely, boom. And it's really hard to sort of describe that to people. It's really hard to describe any sort of, I guess, spiritual interaction without sounding, flaky or, hippie-like. But I guess when it really does, when you have nothing left of your own worth, and something comes and imparts value, not in an ego way. It's the opposite of ego. It's like the ego is the thing that broke and got fragile, and it's the inner man was restored. And it's the man that can love his family again, that can be present, that isn't self-pitying himself, that is, an active help at home. it's sort of really hard to describe that in any other way, I guess, than just like it was a spiritual encounter. And I've sort of learned from the first experience not to believe the lies that can trip you up or that can really debilitate you. So I feel now I have the tools not to go down there. I don't think I'm immune to it. I don't think any human is immune to it. But I think I have better tools. And those tools really, I think so much of it is just reminding your mind, prayer and meditation, if I can put it as a spiritual practice, of who I am, but also in light of who, I'll just put it in this way, who the other is,
Sure. I think what helped me also was the fact that my fiance recognized that I was in a bit of a dark place for a little bit. And she forced me to talk about it.
Right.
Because, I didn't want to talk about much. I felt very just like in my own shell. And I think having a partner that can recognize that you are potentially, you're not yourself, there's something going on, that can force you to talk about it, have you sit down, look at her, and express what is happening. And I think talking to her made me realize how stupid those thoughts that I was saying to myself actually were.
Right.
And I know that you also have a wife as well that has helped you and, guided you through a lot of your life as well. As a person that's grown as an artist, how has having a supportive partner helped you along your journey?
Very honestly, maybe I was I was working through this last night where I asked my wife for notes on a feature that I'm working on the script. And, we almost have to have like a truce moment before that. It's like, okay, I'm not going to take this too personally. And then invariably you're sort of shouting at each other. Like, that's not what I meant. Why do you take it so personally? But I think, just brass tacks, she can call out my shit. She can call out my hypocrisy. She can be brutally honest with me, and it's really hard to hear, but actually from her, I can hear it. I'm even trying to think whether that's actually a true statement, because sometimes it's really hard to hear very honest things about yourself, you know?
I find it really difficult sometimes.
Yeah.
Especially if you're in like a potentially vulnerable state.
Yeah.
It's even harder.
In your most vulnerable state. Yeah. Where you're wanting to be sort of patted and embraced, as opposed to, sometimes that's sort of what's needed. It doesn't always work. The sort of like, just pull your shit together. Yeah. And I'm not saying that's always what happens, but sometimes that happens. I'll put it this way. Like when I was going through my first, through that sort of the first journey, I guess, 2018, my wife was very patient to a point, but I still wasn't out of it. And it wasn't until I had this conversation with my mom, and for some reason, I think one person can say the exact same thing, but when you're seeing it through the prism of someone else, it lands differently. Some reason it sort of landed differently when my mom said it. But I think it just goes to the point that it's going to be the people probably closest to you that's going to be able to be very honest with you, call you out, because my parents call me out if they see me not treat my wife fairly, for instance, or if I've neglected in the small ways, if I've neglected remembering a Mother's Day, or
the simple things,
the simple things, the
Those
simple things that
overlooked.
mean a lot.
Yeah.
My parents are usually on the side of my wife. So yeah, there is a lot of, I feel like, truth and vulnerability in our household, in our family, because I think sometimes it takes sort of a prism of voices to be able to sort of dig into you. Sometimes it's not just the one or it's not just the two, but it takes that right voice at that right time. Right. Could be mom, could be dad, could be your kid, could be your wife. That just hits, then the truth sort of comes in,
I find it fascinating because my parents also do side with my fiance often.
Right.
And I think her parents side with me often.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Right.
Which is really funny. But when you're going through, certain things, there's always ups and downs. There's never just, I feel it's never just like a flat road of just like sadness or depression. There's always moments of ups and downs.
Yeah, definitely.
How do you think that your journey as a director and I guess writer can only really be like your best work when you go through certain things in life, like when you navigate the ups and downs in life? And do you think that some of your work is starting to get to the point where you feel really proud and fulfilled because of all the things that you've gone through to take you to where you are?
I don't even know if I feel proud and fulfilled yet. And I don't know if I ever will be. I feel like there's sort of an endless tap of curiosity that I'll try and sort of burrow into.
You said something, I think I read it in an article. Curiosity pushes you past your current success.
Right.
Something like that.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I heard someone the other day say, I can't remember who was being interviewed. I guess I don't know, I was maybe watching Actors Roundtable or Directors Roundtable, and someone was asking the question, I'm trying to think of who it was, but I think it was a director whose first film was like a masterpiece.
Oh, wow.
And no, sorry, it was an actor. One of the first thing that he was involved with, it's the guy that played in American Fiction. I can't remember his name right now, the actor. But
I don't remember.
The first thing that he was sort of involved in blew open his career. And then the question from the other actors were, how do you top that?
Right.
And I can't remember the answer he gave, but I remember dealing sort of with that question. Not like the first thing that I did was a success, but there was the idea of like, how do you top this thing that you've made? And I was like, well, I honestly think it's a fool's errand, that idea of even trying to top something that you've made. I think when I hear that, it feels like the marker there is success. Is like the ambition that drives what you do next. This thing needs to be better than this thing. And it's like, it's just not possible. It's like you have the wrong engine there that's sort of driving you. I feel the people that really inspire me are the people who I feel like have a different engine. Like the kryptonite that's keeping them going is curiosity, as opposed to drive for success or for like ambition. And so I can't remember who said it. Someone also said, follow your curiosity and not your ambition. And I feel like that's such a great yardstick to sort of live by creatively. And I think if I look at David Lynch, Scorsese, Malick, will chase butterflies, but finds the story in that. It strikes me that Malick doesn't give one iota of consideration for what he deems other people would like or would make him successful. He's interested in sort of like cultivating this sort of the curious voice that's inside him. And I think there's something deeply human, deeply spiritual about that. And when I grow older, I want to live like that. I want to create from that same source, you know.
What keeps you curious? Like after so many years, what about this career, what about your life keeps you on the path of curiosity and wanting to find more or find something new?
I don't know. I think my wife and I actually have quite a bit of talk about this, because I think perhaps even the thing that keeps me curious can be seen sort of maybe as like a gift on the outside. Sure. But that same thing that can be seen as a gift can also be really hard on family. So it can be, I don't want to say a curse, but can be just, it has an inversion that's really tough on family. So I don't know if my grandfather was a very curious person, intellectually. My father too, spiritual and intellectually sort of curious person. I'm a very curious person, but I've also realized that one of my deepest fears is that I don't have enough knowledge. And so, time. There's a relationship between time and knowledge for me. Sure. Like, I feel like I don't have enough time to learn about the world. It makes me immensely curious. Like, well, I don't know. I don't want to say that about myself, but I just know that I love researching and I love, reading articles, and I've got so many stories that I want to tell. And I think we spoke about this last time. And it's also sort of dangerous in a TikTok, social media driven world where you have instant access to so many different things. It's so easy to get distracted by the things that sort of pique my curiosity. And so I have so many outlines for short films and feature films, but I only have like 2-3 scripts written because it's really hard for me to sort of go deeper. And this all sort of stems from, I guess, like a deep fear that I don't have enough knowledge and that I won't have enough time in my life to sap all the knowledge that I can. Again, I'm not an intellectual or a brainy person. That's just sort of me trying to. I feel safe, I guess, by learning. I guess, like, deep down, that's a thing. I didn't even realize this about myself until my wife sort of like said, "Hey, like, I love that you're learning about the world, but just be aware that sometimes you can sort of have blinders on and you'll be on your computer just like going down this rabbit trail and that rabbit trail. And actually it'd be nice if you're home present, helping us cook and, like."
Does that internally, like, is there a weird like push and pull with that? Because I love working. It's like something I'm truly passionate about. And it doesn't feel like work to me. It's just something that I love doing.
Right.
But you sometimes have to let that go to be present with your family. And I feel like that could be tough sometimes.
Right.
I don't know.
Yeah. I mean, immensely tough, especially when your work is what you love to do.
Exactly. Yeah.
Do
you think having kids has helped you stay present more? Do you think it's been harder?
I think kids have helped me to be more present. At the same time, have reminded me of how absolutely not present and selfish my natural disposition is. Again, I don't know if these are all things we learn about ourselves. Like when we're alone, without a partner, you think all's fine and you're going to be very giving as a partner. And then you learn how selfish you are. And then when you have kids, it just, that learning becomes much more amplified. But that's a good thing, I think.
Are kids like a mirror to you, do you think?
Yes, definitely. Yeah, certainly in some ways. I think you see a lot of yourself in your kids. And you also, I mean, the thing that I realized when I was a kid is, well, the question that I was asking is, what did I inherit from my parents that
Traits,
was good?
like traits?
Yeah, or ways to raise kids.
Okay.
Ways to, yeah, I guess it's just like ways to raise kids that become both what is good for their physical well-being, what's good for their emotional well-being, and what is good for their spiritual well-being. So what have I inherited from my parents that I can go, wow? Because there are things when, as a kid, when I look at the way that I was raised, I was like, I would never want to raise my kids that way. I would never speak to my son like that. Or I would always listen and respond immediately when they speak to me. And then you become a dad and you're like, oh, I've got the same predispositions that my dad had or that my mom had. Certainly that my dad, I'm a lot like my dad. And it's not as easy as just, oh, well, I'm going to not be like that. I've inherited some of that, you know? So some of it sort of gets passed down just through osmosis or through genetics. And then some of it is ways of teaching.
And then you have to balance how your wife was also raised as well in her style, or what she was brought down with.
Her family's dynamic. Yeah, definitely that. And so, yeah, it's trying to chew the meat and spit out the bones. And before I had kids, I thought I was going to spit out a lot of bones. I kept a lot of it. I've realized that a lot of what my parents did for me are super useful. And even though I sort of fought against it a little bit
fought against it when you were first having kids, or fought against it when you were a kid?
Fought against it when I was a kid. And even just before I had kids, I was like, well, this is how I then would want to raise my kids. It's like, actually, I took on a lot of the way that I was raised. That's how I'm raising my kids, you know?
Something that I've talked to with parents and like people that I work with that are dads and mothers is the idea of like forced adversity. And I find this to be like a really interesting topic, and something that I mean, I don't have kids, but one day I hope to, is you see a lot of successful people, and a lot of the reason is because they went through a lot of adversity in their childhood. And as a parent, you always want to give your kid better than what you have, a better life than what you had. But there always comes with that back and forth of, well, I don't want to give them too much because part of who I am is because of that adversity, some of the hardships. So like as a parent, how do you even balance the fact of my child needs to go through hardships and needs to go through adversity, but it's almost like forced sometimes?
Yeah, it certainly is. It certainly is not wanting to become a helicopter parent, right? So like that's sort of a phrase that is, I guess, popular today. I definitely don't want to be that. And me and my wife have decided that 2 years ago we watched the show. I can't even remember what it was called. You can watch 1 or 2 episodes about these kids in Japan that get sent out to go and buy groceries. Like,
oh, I've seen this. It's wild.
Young kids.
They like walk like a mile or 2 miles, something like that. Yeah, I've seen that.
And because I've also been reading this book, The Coddling of the American Mind, by Jonathan Haidt and Greg Lukianoff.
What is it calling?
The coddling of the American mind, meaning we're going to protect.
Right.
Protect kids at university. But when you do that, and when you sort of remove things that challenge kids, I'm now talking young kids, they don't become resilient when they grow older. And so my wife and I just decided we're going to let the kids like go to the grocery store, which is across the road, and we can see from our window, we can see them so we can keep an eye on them. But people did go like, what's happening? What are you doing? Like, this is New York City. But when I was a kid, when I was 6 years old, I was driving my bicycle to school every day. My son's now 9 years old, and we still walk him to school, which we live in a different world,
Sure.
Not in actual danger, mind you. I think it's literally just the perception, because we're all interconnected and we're all on social media. The dangers that you see in another part of the world, you sort of import that into your world, thinking that the world here is just as dangerous as it is somewhere else in the world, and it isn't. I grew up in South Africa. South Africa is super dangerous. But at 6 years old, I was riding my bike to school alone. So I'm trying to give my kids that same autonomy and the same sort of brush up against reality so that they can learn the skills. Essentially, it's sort of like exposure therapy. Expose them to things that is challenging to them, but then they learn early on how to cope with it, so that by the time, hopefully, that they become teenagers and adults, they have more autonomy, they have more agency, and they're mentally, I think that's the big thing, they're mentally and spiritually strong and resilient.
Right.
And I think teaching the kids also like spiritual practices, in small ways, teaching them about sacrifice and how important that is for our experience as humans. I think I heard this thing by this guy called Andrew Huberman.
Right.
And he was talking about cocaine, and he was saying that the reason why cocaine, and I think in general drugs, are so bad for us is because it short circuits the reward, the sacrifice and reward system that the human body sort of operates on. So when you get drugs, you just get reward.
Yeah.
And we're not used to that, like,
Just being handed something.
Yeah, and that like feedback loop of reward. We sort of need the sacrifice and then reward, and it's our meaning making systems are in that. And social media, slowly but surely, is sort of rewiring our kids' brains to just to love the reward and not be used to the sacrifice part. And I think it makes kids really weak. It really, I think really algorithms for me is like, I have a really fraught relationship with social media, but in particular, very algorithmatized social media, YouTube being a massive part of that.
Sure.
YouTube, Instagram, TikTok, they rewire our brains. We all know, as people who have an understanding.
I've recognized it
within
myself.
We've recognized
Absolutely.
it.
Yeah.
But particularly kids.
Do you allow your kids on social media? YouTube?
No. YouTube, fraught relationship with it, yes. He tapped into it when he was a little kid, and he became so used to it. And we thought nothing of it at the time. And I didn't realize how sort of pernicious YouTube is. I mean, it's not even the fact that, it's not that he could watch bad things. I don't even really care about that. That we can sort of look at and go, don't do that. It's the fact that he can just flick from the next to the next to the next. And when you take that thing away from him, it's like you're dealing with a demon.
Yeah.
I'm not saying that's my kid, but I can see how it can do that.
I notice that a lot in restaurants.
Right.
Seeing parents with their kids and the kids, getting upset at the dinner table and then just getting thrown an iPad for the rest of the dinner.
Right.
That to me has always been something that I recognize as a huge issue.
Right.
And not parenting your kids to be at a dinner table. They're just away. They're mindless in a screen.
Right.
I always found to be very weird.
And so that's exactly it. And that's what I don't want my kids to become, because I'm going to go on a slight tangent.
Yeah, it's okay.
Go with me.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of things to sort of tie together here. But you can recognize what's happening to you when you engage with that object.
Yeah.
Right? Like, you're not as mentally strong. Your emotions are all over the place, probably at the end of spending 2 hours on an Instagram feed where you're seeing, this DP just did that DP just did this. But in your mind, it's registering as the same DP that's done this project, and now he's done that project. But actually, this DP hasn't done anything in 6 months, and that
Right.
DP hasn't done anything in a year. But to you, it's one DP, you know? And so you're reminded of how shit you are and how inadequate you are. And it's such a lie. If you whip out, I'm sorry, I have this here, but if you whip out this device and you look at the back of it, there's an icon on it, right? Yeah. And the icon is of what? What do you see there?
An apple that looks like it was half eaten.
Right. Yeah. And what story, like famous story, has an apple that's half eaten on it?
Was it Adam and Eve? Yeah.
Probably one of the most famous stories. Yeah. Yeah. Why is that relevant? Adam and Eve was in the Garden of Eden. They were sort of in a utopia. And things were good. They were jamming with God, as the story goes. They were in right relationship to each other. And then the temptation was, and the thing that God told them not to do, was eat of the tree of knowledge. And they were like, no, we're curious. We're not curious, I wouldn't say. It's actually, there was a thing of pride. We want to be like God. We want this tap of knowledge, right? And instantly it created, as the story goes, it created the first fall of mankind. Again, don't know if that's history, don't care. But there's a truth in that story that we can see is self-evident. It's self-evident in our own human behavior. I think the Tower of Babel is another story. It's like we want to ascend to have the greatness, build this great tower, and then that whole thing gets broken down and our languages get interspersed. But what we're doing essentially is we are building a Tower of Babel. We are connecting with these devices. We're all connecting to each other. Our languages, like accents, are dying in the world. Languages are sort of like dying in the world. Like it's so rare that I hear a New York accent. And it's a thing I loved about movies back in the day. And I hardly hear that accent anymore. And it's because these things are sort of, what's the word? Making everything the same. And also eroding our mental health. I think it's certainly doing that. If you look at mental health curves from like 1999, you go through 2007 when Facebook was introduced, when social media essentially was introduced, still sort of nothing happened. Mental health, suicidality curves sort of flat, still flat. And then when the algorithm was introduced, things just sort of went skyrocketed, you know? And there's something I heard, and this is where there's already a little bit of like conspiracy theory bias in that, but I heard the guys that did The Social Dilemma. I don't know if you've seen that on Netflix. They did a sort of like a TED Talk thing on, I don't think it was TED necessarily, a TED Talk, but something similar to it, called The AI Dilemma, where they talk about artificial intelligence. And they mentioned something in that to me was like I don't know, I just sort of like put my alarm bells on. They said, things in the AI domain didn't really progress until they realized that the key in artificial intelligence was hidden in language. So as soon as these computers could look at language, and I think the first way that they trained ChatGPT, for instance, was they needed to find public use or free to use word usages. Sure. And I think they started on books and stuff, and then they sort of tapped that dry, and then they went to Amazon reviews, and they used Amazon reviews to sort of figure out the pattern of human speech and how to learn. But it was hidden in words. And so these two guys have said that basically words decode and describe or define reality. Those are the words that they use. And I'm like, whoa, isn't that like, doesn't John 1 say that like in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God, and everything that was created through the Word, and through the Word all things were sustained. Again, I don't know if that's just an allegory, but there's an observation about reality in those scriptures that's so prescient.
Yeah.
And these guys are recognizing that words decode and define or describe reality, meaning that, and then they said this too, they said that these AI models basically create a shadow of the real world. It's not the real world, but it's a shadow of the real world. We just see the shadows and it looks to us sort of like reality, but it isn't. It's the inversion of reality. It's the dark side of reality, and it's a distortion of reality, and it made me think about, eschatologically, even, whether we are at a sort of reaching sort of a critical point, whether we are sort of reaching a point where reality and its inverse is going to be indistinguishable. And, I don't know. The mark of the beast is a number. It's an algorithm. So anyway.
Do you see that do you see any positives of what AI could bring to
I think it's
art or to just creativity in general, life?
Yeah. I see so many positives.
Right. Do you battle with the idea that there are a lot of positives, but you don't want to see it sometimes? Like when I first heard of AI, I almost didn't want to even look. Like I think it was just fear driven.
Right.
Until I opened my mind up to see like what it could be.
Right. I mean, the positives are immense. I mean, we know it from using ChatGPT and using Midjourney and Runway, all these things that are coming out. Yeah. They're incredible. Even just in medicine, the stuff that's happening it sort of blows the mind. I mean, Ray Kurzweil, one of the pioneers of artificial intelligence, I think he mentioned that he thinks immortality is possible by 2030. As AI and nanobiotechnology develops. But I think what we're eroding is the thing that I mentioned earlier, our relationship with sacrifice and reward. We're sort of eroding and neglecting the fact that we actually find meaning when things get really tough and when things get really hard. And that's a really hard thing to wrestle with. And what do I know? I'm not a philosopher. I'm really just speaking from personal experience. But I can also say that my most truest touch or encounter with reality itself, with God, for me, was in my lowest moments. And when you start to erode that and take that away, and that's what these systems are doing, they're taking it away. They're making it easier for us to have convenience, to not fight for our food, which we're not really doing anymore. When people sort of hark on religion, especially for being so brutal, because why would anyone call for sacrifice? Sure. And I'm like, sacrifice has really only been abstracted. So we still have an implicit relationship with sacrifice. If you want to be better at your craft, you're going to choose not to go out with your friends and go drink or party because you want to focus on writing. Yeah. Or if you want to get into better shape, you're going to choose not to have that slice of cake and do a workout instead. And that's all sacrifice. But if you can't recognize sacrifice, the sort of the religious idea of sacrifice as being useful, and you discount it, you sort of do so at your own peril. Because I think again, sort of from experience, I know that those things that have tested me most have been also the things that I've sort of learned the most about myself, about my surroundings, about my family, just about how I feel like, who am I to say, but I feel like now I better understand how reality works. The book of Job, for instance, to me has been like a massive, I've learned so much from that story, right? Everything went wrong with Job, for Job. Again, as the story goes, the devil came to God and said, "Oh, you have such a loyal follower, such a devout believer in Job. But what happens if I test him?" Again, I may be sort of phrasing this incorrectly, but he hasn't really been tested. And so God said, "You may touch him. Oh, you may take from his land, but do not touch him." And as the story grows, something goes wrong with Job. His land gets taken, but he doesn't curse God. And then his family gets hurt. He doesn't curse God. And he gets smitten with disease, and all his friends are now saying, like, "Why don't you just curse God and die?" And he doesn't. Because he understood that if you sort of have that relationship with reality, with God, if you sort of become cynical and pessimistic, then things, like I was saying, things turn bad.
Right.
Things turn worse. And I've learned so much from that story. I think I've also learned a lot from the story of the guy that wrote "It Is Well With My Soul," that old hymn, because things went horribly bad if you read the story of what happened to that guy. But to still be able to say, despite all of that, it is well, and it's hard. I know that costs you something, right? I think to still be able to say that, I don't know how many people can say that today in 2023, when their whole systems have been rewired to only get what they want.
Right.
I can recognize that in myself. The more I'm on these devices, I can see it in my kids. I can see it all around me, but I can really see it in myself. The more I'm on these devices, the less of a good father and a good husband and a good son I become, and the more entitled I become.
Right.
And the harder it is to go, when I get hit with something adversarial, to go, you know what? I'm going to just take this lesson and learn from it. I think social media really, social media and anything algorithmic can be to blame for that.
Yeah.
You know,
I think it's really tough. I recognize all of that too, but there's also that positive side of social media too, and like the business and like how we want to share our creative work with the world. And there's always that push and pull for me with social media as well.
Yeah.
And I don't know if like you notice this, but for me, when I'm in a very like positive state, or I'm feeling good, maybe I'm busy.
Social media is great.
Social media is great.
Yeah.
But when I am feeling bad, I haven't been booked in, however long, something's going wrong. Social media it's a curse to me.
But I'm going to address something there. Why is that? You've said something in there that I think is so like...
Curse.
No. You've said... I only say this because I recognize this.
Is it when I said something is going wrong, social media is bad? Is it because I'm on social media too much at that moment?
Exactly.
Right.
Only because...
I think you're absolutely right.
Because when things are going well...
I'm more present and not really engaging too much in that.
You're present, you're not really engaging, and also, maybe this is not true for you, but I know this about myself. It's so much easier to post something on social media when you're busy and you're not looking at it, and it's like, oh, that thing's, people are liking it, great, I feel good. But when you're not busy, you're sitting there, you have nothing to release. You're only taking in. You're not putting out. You're only taking in. It's like really cancerous.
Yes.
Because now you're comparing yourself to other people. You're feeling really horrible about yourself. You're seeing, again, like I said, this person has done that person has done that person has done that. But to you, subconsciously, it's like one person is just constantly putting out. How can you compete with that person?
Yeah.
And so social media is great when you're putting out.
Yeah.
It really sort of sucks when you don't have anything to put out.
Right.
And it sucks that that's the reality.
Right.
Because it just, again, shows us how egotistical we are.
Right.
You know?
I feel like I delete Instagram once a month, twice a month, maybe.
Right.
For me, that's like, because I have such a habit of just going on it and like just scrolling. I tell myself all the time, I'm going to break this habit, but I think it is truly one of the hardest habits to break for people.
Right.
Is that just mindless scrolling.
Right.
I don't know if you have any. I don't know if you still do, like just mindless scrolling, but that's something that I have a really hard time breaking sometimes.
I really try not to, honestly.
Yeah.
I'm not good at it. I think where I'm worse at is YouTube. Like it's got I think I've sort of recognized there's a couple of aspects to social media that I think sort of nefarious. And with Instagram, you have a double whammy. One is the sheer fact of comparison, that you're not doing something that someone else is doing. So that's the one. The other one is just sort of the sheer act of scrolling. Yeah. It's the fact that it has controlled your mind and you're just sort of doing this. And there's that, I think it's something that's happening more psychologically, and I dare to say even spiritually, is that they've hooked you. Again, what they say in social media, you're a user. Same word used for drug addicts. So they've hacked your attention, and now there's a spiritual atrophying that's happening. There's like a human atrophying that I think is happening.
Yeah. Because very rarely do I feel positive after scrolling. Like, honestly, never.
Right.
There's never really a positive feeling afterwards.
Right. I think I've been able to sort of like recognize the comparison aspect, but I feel like I can sort of like, I feel like I don't go on Instagram nearly as much as I used to because I've recognized that. Because now all of a sudden the comparison aspect is very personal. Now I'm thinking about someone that I need to beat, and I don't want to think
deeper into the comparison thing of how you kind of maybe overcame that a little bit, or how you've worked through that? Because I still am in that big time, for sure.
I think in between 28 and 32, I had sort of started to recognize, again, sort of at my first breaking point, when I feel like I sort of had that encounter with the deepest reality for me with God. I sort of recognized that I was chasing stories or ideas that was trying to sort of be cool and be accepted and maybe relevant, but had none of what I truly believe about myself and about the world and about how reality works. Again, I was 28, and maybe you don't even really know that, but I know my parents are missionaries. I grew up in a Christian family. As a teenager, I didn't want to admit that to a lot of people, even into my early adolescence. Like when I first moved to New York, I didn't really want to tell stories that came from that part of me because, you know, I feel like there'd be an hostility to it, and I get it. Like, you know, the Christianity or the religious aspect of religion in America has sort of a different connotation. Maybe all over the world, but here it's quite militant. And there's not a lot of grace and love in it. And so I get that because I understood that because a lot of people saw religion in that way, or faith, there was sort of a hostility to it. And so I was like, oh, I don't want to go down there. I want to work, and I want to make work that feels cool. And so so that I could get accepted. and we all do that with different parts of our own selves. Like we'll sort of hide parts of our own self just so that we're accepted. And that's the part of me that felt sort of the most deeply me, that I was sort of hiding. And then when I had that moment, my sort of rock bottom, I think there was sort of a realization that actually this is the thing that gives me the most life. And weirdly enough, I think part of the way that I saw the world and believed about myself and the world was sort of seeping through my work anyway. But it was the first time that I realized, you know what? I think I can value this part of me, and I don't really want to look at anything else. I sort of want to explore what's in me and read articles and read books that bring that deep interest of mine. And it's always tangentially seeping into some other areas of interest. But I want to listen to that voice that's sort of inside me. And I realized that I'm just not going to get that from Instagram. I'm not and so the comparison side of me died down because I sort of realized, you know what? I think the things that I'm looking for, I also just sort of recognized not a lot of other people dare to go there. Malik goes there, Scorsese goes there, Tarkovsky goes there, what's the other guy's name? Kieslowski goes there. And these have become, I think for me, the people that I really look up to. Right. And I've mentioned them before. Those are the people that sort of follow the curiosity. They also just happen to be people that are, David Lynch is another person that sort of follows his curiosity, who I don't think, he's a spiritualist. I don't think we necessarily have the same faith or belief system, but it's those sort of people that I realize, actually, I don't want to be influenced by things that's on Instagram or things that are outside me, that's trendy. And so now I'm like, now I need to be trendy, or now I'm like, it's like writing a test, right? Like where the clock's running out because I have a bad relationship to time. Like I said before, I feel like there's things that I want to figure out and do before my time runs out, which is stupid, but still a human feeling of mine. I feel like now I can be a little bit more patient and go, you know what, there's a story in me that I want to tell. And I really want to dig that story out. And it's not related to this thing or that thing that this person has just done. Of course, there's things that I've seen that's going to sort of bleed into me subconsciously. But I think that's why I've been able to have a better relationship to, I think, the social media platform that creates the most comparison. And I sort of pivoted to YouTube just because it was sort of a fountain of things that I was curious about. It could sort of answer, it could help me with research. But I realized that it has that same algorithm that's stealing all my attention. And now I'm watching videos about Whistling Diesel, the guy that like blows up all these cars, and and I'm like, I lost track of the thing that I was searching, and so they're all pernicious, I think, at base level because they steal your attention. I think Instagram perhaps is even a little bit more pernicious because it's so bad for comparison.
I want to go back because you said something that I think really opened my eyes to something about comparison and your journey from 28 to 32. I think you said that you were trying to...
That's when I had my first kid too.
So at 25, where I am, I feel like I'm in this personal turmoil right now of, over the past 2 or so years, really trying to find what I believe in, what my faith is.
Right.
Because I'd say about 6-7 years ago, my dad became a pastor, or a preacher.
Right.
Became a preacher. He's a born-again Christian.
Right.
And in the beginning, I didn't want to hear any of it. Right. I grew up going to church, but it was only because I was like forced to go on a Sunday because it was the right thing to do. So I had a very weird relationship with it.
Right.
And when I would have conversations with him, the conversation started shifting from like me and my dad to, me and my dad and a spiritual dad. So it was like, I think I remember telling him one time, I was like, I don't want to talk to, you about the spiritual stuff. I just want to talk to you. And it took me as dad. And it took me a really, really long time. I'd say 4 years to be able to like understand what he was talking about. And I remember vividly him saying, I know that you may not be interested in what I want to tell you right now, but just know that I'm planting seeds. And he was so right. Like I'd say probably 2 years ago, I really started to like dive into Christianity more. I started listening to music. Like I said, Oceans was a huge player for me in that. Still listen to it to this day, all the time. And I think that's something that I haven't really publicly like put out there in the world. And I think this podcast has actually been a platform for me to talk about it. I did an episode maybe 2 months ago with somebody, and that was the first time I actually publicly talked about it. And
I think I saw that.
And it felt really good to talk about it. And that's why I'm interested in talking about it with you. But that's something that I struggle with comparison, because I haven't committed to what I truly believe in yet.
It's really hard. I think, again, I empathize with where you're coming from, because I think there's so many distortions of Christianity, but I mean, I would probably say a lot of faiths, but particularly in the US, there's so many distortions. And I think when people get exposed to a bad version of it, which a lot of people do, it just turns them off. And I get it. And what is the one true faith? I don't know. All I can say is I've sort of had an encounter with someone that changed me, that gave me my identity back when I had nothing. And part of that journey was, again, the seeds that my dad planted when I was young, and I didn't want to hear about it at all. But the thing that I would see was I would come into the living room in the middle of the night, because we're insomniacs, my whole family. And I would wake up, need to go to the bathroom, and I'd see my dad, and he'd be sitting in the lounge. I'm like, "Oh, Dad, what you up to?" And he's like sitting cross-legged on the couch, and he's like, "I'm sitting on God's lap." I was like, "Oh, what does that mean?" But I now recognize that he sort of has had all his life, to this day, a spiritual practice that allows him to sort of return to, I'm beloved. And I think really when you act out of that place, it's a whole place, you're not perfect. Like that, you're not going to behave perfectly. You're not going to have a perfect view of yourself. But I think it's really, it's hard to articulate, because it's hard to sound overly spiritual, and it's hard to sound like you're preaching. That's not what I'm trying to do. It's just, I think I sort of recognize your journey. I definitely had that. I can definitely share that journey. And I think the seeds that your dad has planted, I think it's amazing that you're sort of seeing the fruit of that. And I know everyone's journey is going to be different, and some people are not going to be comfortable even with us sort of talking about it in this way.
And that's something I recognize too, is that by me even talking about it, I know that there's going to be people that don't want to hear this at all.
Yeah, and that's fine. And that's fine, Yeah, I do think it's important for people to sort of like.
But the one, I will say this too, though, that one podcast that I did 2 months ago with his name's Mark, and that was the first time I talked about it, and I put some stuff up about it. The amount of positive feedback that I got from people that saying like, "Thank you for sharing this," or like talking about it. And it actually showed me a whole new side of people that I never allowed myself to even open up myself to.
Right. I think, I wonder. I'm not saying I know, but I wonder if a lot of that is of people who probably relate in the same way, but you're probably not going to find that from people who don't relate in that, meaning people that don't share the worldview or the way that you see the world in that, they'll probably not say anything. But a lot of people that are sort of like, they themselves are have a faith or have a spirituality that don't feel, because it's not in our business, in the world in general, it's just not something we talk about. And so when you do hear someone talk about it, when I hear when I do hear Scorsese talk about it, or even Ethan Hawke talk about it, or Jim Carrey talk about his spirituality, or Nick Cave for me has been like a recent, it's just so encouraging seeing him talk about the way that he's sort of processing those aspects of himself. It is very encouraging. But I am also aware, I heard someone say it, and I think it's really true. There's nothing like a gift that someone, or there's nothing like a treasure that someone have to discover themselves, and I think that's true for everyone's sort of individual journey. Life, I think, sort of thrust me to my knees, and I just had nowhere. Lower wasn't an option, because lower meant sort of the end, and I didn't want to go there, and I sort of reached out, and I think that was my deepest touch with reality, Well,
thank you for sharing all that. I do
No
appreciate
worries.
it. Yeah. I know that a lot of people probably want to hear about like the actual filmmaking side, but I have one more question about like family and stuff. Did you always want to be a father? Because
I'm trying to think. No.
I've recognized that I think part of my calling is to be a dad.
Right.
And I'm really excited to be a dad one day.
I didn't think I would I didn't think I would be a good dad. Let me put it that way. But that's not insinuating that I am a good dad. I just didn't think that I would be good.
Yeah.
Or let me try to think of a different way to phrase that. I thought I would be a bad dad. Maybe that's the better way to phrase it. And so that scared me, because I just wasn't a child person. I just wasn't a kid person.
Is that what made you think that? Just the fact that you weren't a child person? Nothing else besides?
No, nothing else. I just wasn't into kids. I didn't like hanging out with kids. The pastor's kid, so one of my best friends, he was a kid person. He was also a model. And I always thought, okay, all the chicks are going to go for this guy, because he's like, into kids, and he's super handsome, super tall. And my wife chose me. And I think it just came, I think even as a young dad, I was afraid of like, when is the sort of the emotion going to come? And someone warned me, a close friend of mine said, look, a lot of people talk about this like weight of emotion that comes over you when your child gets born. And I didn't have it. I didn't have it for 8 months.
Really?
Yeah.
Did that worry you?
I'm trying to really think, did it worry me? No, I don't think it worried me as much, just because I had that heads up. Just because I had that heads up. And then when it came like 8 months, 12, 14 months, 2 years, 18 months, 2 years, 3 years, it's like, oh my God, if anything were to happen to these kids, like I don't know how I would go on, and that you don't know you have that in you. I didn't know, because I wasn't a kid person. So I didn't know I could even, I didn't realize I could love anyone like that. Like, I love my mom, I love my dad, I love my wife, I love my sister. But it's a different kind of love, knowing that these people these kids are dependent on you, and they are of you, that realization. And then you see bits of yourself in your kids. I see in my daughter particularly, my daughter actually is so unlike me. She's like me in some ways, but she's so unlike me in that she's so wild. I was never that wild, but in the best way. I'm like, who are you? You know, in a
Like
way,
spontaneous,
spontaneous, wild, crazy, sings, boisterous, and a natural sort of actor, a natural showman. Not me at all. And my son. We're more cerebral. We're more like my dad and my grandfather. But my daughter is like, you put a camera on her and she comes alive. And to be able to see that and recognize that it did come from me. Part of me is in that person, but also to go, I've never had a person like this in my life. I would always sort of judge that person of like, they're putting on a show. But no, this is innately my daughter, innately.
Wow.
From the womb. She came out screaming, top of her lungs, and we're like, what's this ride going to be like? And it's been the best. And then my son has been like more like me. And I spent, like I said, when I was walking up here, like we're going to go snowboarding together. And, there's many sides to the parental coin, and many sides of yourself that you see in your kids. But I think I was sort of like taken aback by my daughter, just because she's so other than me. But she's also, I think, had me much through her. I've had so much more grace for people that are unlike me, who maybe I would have judged before. Really try not to judge in any way. But I always...
There is some natural humanistic element to judge, though. Right?
Yeah, I think, part of me really admires and perhaps even judge, and how's that possible to do both of those? But people that could be really extroverted. And because I'm not that, sometimes I feel like, wow, someone's putting on a show, but damn, I wish I could put on a show like they're putting on, because maybe, and again, the ego part of me goes, maybe it'll get me into that meeting, or that door would open to me, because I hate networking. It's not something I'm very comfortable with, but I know people that really are comfortable with it, and they do it second nature. They do it so well. One of my best friends does it so well. Like, damn, I wish I was sort of like that. But sometimes it feels to me like, is that just show? But it's not. It's innately who they are. And I can now say that because I have my daughter in my life.
Amazing.
Who's a natural showman.
Wow, that's amazing. I want to read something that you said. I'm going to move a little bit towards more career something, but I think I read this in an article you did with Music Bed a long time ago, I think. Because I remember you started your creative career in music, and you've obviously evolved into where you are today. So there's a bunch of different paths. But as a director in the beginning, you said something about music being a driving factor in your storytelling. And I think you said, when I first started, everything I made had a musical anchor. Even with narratives, it was still anchored and held together with music. But what I'm trying to do at the moment is lose all of that. It's an exercise in growth. Can I create something good that doesn't just rely on my strengths? It's important to do something you're not comfortable with. I guess years later, after hearing that, how do you think you have grown from saying that?
Well, I mean, just to use an example of that, a practical example of that, I think sometimes I'd think about a story, I'd see an image, and one of the first things that I would do is I create a playlist. I don't do that anymore. I now, I work on outlines, first things, or log line, character descriptions, outlines, and then I'll start writing. And for a lot of projects, I haven't even made playlists, because I'm trying to really think about character and story. I mean, the arguments that my wife and I had last night was about story and character, and
within the edit or within the future that you're making.
Within some of the longer form stuff that I'm working on. And it's really something that I would say that these days it's not even a cognitive thing. It's because I've sort of exercised that out of my process, or it's perhaps even my curiosity now is sort of, I'm much more interested in understanding how people behave. And for me in particular, I think I'm often very interested in stories where the location is a character, is a invisible character in the film, because I think the location and the stories that I'm interested in, the location puts sort of a pressure on the relationships and the characters and makes them behave or is part of their behavioral patterns. Mm-hmm. So, I did a short film in Ukraine before the war started, and it's very much a story of character and place.
Right.
And then I just shot one out in Trona, and again, it's about a story about character and place. And then the one that I'm working on right now, set here in Coney Island, Brighton Beach, is the same. And it's just about how the environment sort of puts pressure on people, and then how do they behave because of that. And the environment, when I say place and environment, can be both the buildings, the landscape, but also the sort of without trying to sound too smart, but sort of the geopolitics of an area. Like what's happening in a particular area, and how's that affecting the family story you're telling. And inherently, would you go, is every story sort of like that? Perhaps, but even if I look at the sort of films that I love, like Godland from this year, a missionary that travels from Denmark to Iceland, but really struggles because the land is so harsh against his mission. Oppenheimer,
right.
Sort of a similar thing. Past Lives, the New York Korean Factor.
I love that movie.
So I think it has shifted away from music, to answer your question, because I think my interests have changed a little bit over the last couple of years.
Do you remember like a project that you did? Maybe it was one of your first ones where you realized that you're really focusing on character and story. And after completing it, did you realize a shift in yourself of like, oh, this feels different? Like this feels like a different project?
No, because I think it's been, and I think that's been a lot of my career. And I find it tricky sometimes when I hear people say, oh, this is going to change my career, or this is going to be so different, but particularly this is going to be my break.
Right.
And people would sort of they'll say that about a particular project. This is going to be the thing that's either so good or so different that people are going to see me different. Because I think it is true for some people, but I think for a lot of people, it's the slow and steady race that I think is better for a person first, for our mental well-being. And I think is also just the general story. But a lot of people sort of give up because our society, TikTok and Instagram and YouTube, tells us that we need that breakout success. But I don't think that's really everyone's story. It's not a lot of people's stories. And so I've also recognized within myself that, like, for instance, right now I'm trying to work on comedies. I'm trying to write a comedy like The Emperor's Got No Clothes. I'm trying to write a feature version of that. That's sort of like, that's sort of a critique on culture, but also you can have a lot of fun with it. About a young emperor or a young kid who's become emperor, grew up entitled, obsessed with fashion, but his whole country is starving. It's sort of the Marie Antoinette story as well, but I sort of want to I think in a weird way, the parable or the Hans Christian Andersen version of it is way more potent, because you have what you find in a lot of like Eastern Orthodox stories. You have the holy fool, the little kid who's able to see reality and call out what reality truly is. There's just a lot of room for comedy in that. But when people look at my work, they're probably going to go, it'll be like, oh, he's doing comedy now, perhaps. I actually did a music video, weirdly enough, that sort of inspired that idea about these child dictators. It's a music video for young fathers.
Yeah.
And I've thought for a long time, how can I turn that sort of idea into a feature? And then recently, The Emperor's Got No Clothes sort of stood out to me. That's the story. And it's really the story of one of those kids, you know, and that's the story I want to tell. But I think to a lot of people, and I remember even like a lot of people said to me like, oh, that's something different, you know, didn't think you had it in you, but it's nice to see you trying something different. And I think they're all behind the scenes, they're all slow steps that I've written, you know, a story about a priest who gets a hard on, a celibate priest who gets a hard on while baptizing one of his parishioners. And I think I'm going to like set it in like some Eastern European country. So it's like an Orthodox priest. But he sees it as a sign of God that he needs to go find a partner. And it's a journey of someone shedding the religious layers that they've carried for so long and trying to reintegrate back into life and just playing with like, I want to do it sort of like subjective interview style where people that we interview from his community and he himself can sort of relay their truth, so to speak, his truth. They see it a little bit objectively, but also they're influenced by him. And then do objective storytelling, do different aspect ratios to tell that story. And then you tell the story of what actually happened and you sort of intercut that. And you can use that comedically as this priest is trying to sort of just reintegrate back to life. So that's another story. I've got another story about a Romany matriarch that Gucci or a big fashion house has stolen her designs. And she's trying to like get her whole little village together to stage her show using models from her village and people to help, you know, do seams and patterns and stuff from her village to stage a show outside an actual fashion show and to sort of show that she's the real deal. And others that I've sort of like worked on, but if you don't sort of know my process, just like anyone's, you just don't know that I'm working on these things. But it's slow growth. It's like slowly trying to, you know, stretch another part of the muscle. And so I can't really look back and go, oh, you know, that was the thing that felt like a sort of a sea shift, change in the work. There are pieces though that I can look at and go, you know what? That finally feels like something that I really wanted to make. That was sort of unencumbered by client or agency expectation. And I really want to do more of that.
Do you think a lot of those pieces passion projects?
Yeah, most of them are passion projects.
Do you think over the years that you've been filmmaking, obviously the scale of your work has grown and you know, the potential of crew, equipment, the overall scope of a project has grown. Do you think creating passion projects, you have to maintain a certain scope?
No. No, and I'm sorry I'm saying it so, but I'm saying that to myself because I think that's the temptation. Is again, it's that temptation of the ambition. Yeah, it has to go bigger and it has to go, like, I really love it when filmmakers sort of return. I'm hoping the day will come when Denis Villeneuve will return to some of the smaller works. Not like I don't like Dune or Blade Runner, but the intimate stuff, Incendie or Polytechnic was like, oh, they hit here, you know?
Well, it's like the idea of what you said, not looking at your previous work as like, oh, I need to do top that.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. I think that's the thing. I've started to believe that actually that's a very bad way of thinking about longevity and creativity is I need to top this. Like, okay, well then, like, what's going to be your top? You know, like, and is other people's definition of top going to be the same as your definition? I was just going to say,
what even is that definition of top? Because for me, I always think like, oh, my next work has to visually look so much better than the next. But like, that's a subjective thing.
Right.
It's like, it's arbitrary what is top.
Exactly. It's just, for me, I guess, like as a director or filmmaker, director, I think I'm just sort of recognizing, as long as it's sort of honest and it's exploring something that means a lot to me, that's it. Because even I sort of get not frustrated, but it goes sort of saddens me when I hear people go, oh, like, you know, when are you going to sort of transition into features? As if...
Like you're shedding a new layer or something.
Exactly. Yeah. And as if doing passion projects and music videos is sort of like lower than, you know? It isn't. I want to go make some features, but then I still, if a song compels me, moves me, I want to make a music video. Right. I'll put my own money into it if I have to, like I try and always do. Or just, I'm not trying to put my own money, I'm just trying to make the thing that needs to be made. Sometimes that's going to be a music video. I did this this film called You Will Not Have My Hatred, just about a piece of writing that I truly believe in. So sometimes it's going to be some format agnostic thing. Sometimes it's going to be a documentary. I want to make a film about, and I don't even know what it's necessarily going to be. I don't think it's going to be a narrative. I don't even know if it's going to be a documentary. Maybe it's going to be some pastiche, mixed media sort of thing about the fine structure constant, the alpha. And there's this scientist, Richard Feynman, who wrote about the fine structure constant. Richard Dawkins, and Christopher Hitchens talk about all the arguments for faith. And they go, oh, the moral arguments suck. There's so many arguments that really suck, but the one that's really, really compelling is the fine-tuning argument. The fact that the universe, if you throw out one little iota of the parameters of our distance to the sun, for instance, this thing doesn't work. We don't exist. Not only do we don't exist, but cells don't exist. And so it's this idea that the universe is finely tuned. And the universe is actually so finely tuned to a specific number, 1/137. So if you go and research that number, it's the number alpha. And I may be getting this wrong sort of technically, but hopefully you can go sort of with the thrust of what I'm saying. Sure. But that number is a number that a lot of scientists, it's a unitless number. So it doesn't have meters or anything. It's sort of I don't want to, again, I might get this scientifically or mathematically incorrect, but it's sort of a number without units. It's sort of a pure number. But it's a number that when scientists puts it into some of these equations, the equations just work. And so this number doesn't just appear in one equation, it seems to appear across a variety of equations that sort of that describes the universe. And Richard Feynman, this scientist, spoke about this number, and he said, I have this number up on my wall and I keep looking at this number because it haunts me. I don't know where this number comes from. And then he says something like, but I imagine this number was sort of, was written by God or something like this. And there's something so, for me, so super curious about that number. Almost like, you know, again, I don't know if this is going to be a feature, but like the number pi, right? The movie Pi. There's something curious, deeply curious about this number. And I feel like I want to find the story there, you know? And again, I don't know what it is. I don't know if it's going to be a feature, but it's really piquing my curiosity. And just me as a person, like I feel my own sense of value in understanding that everything was uniquely tuned and designed. And if you throw the balance out of one of those things, I don't exist. So I'm sort of innately tied to that number. So are you, you know? Right. So anyway, all that to say, I think I try and just go where the curiosity leads.
Do you, with all the different projects that you, stories that you want to tell and all this, you know, just ideas, how often are you talking about it with like your peers or like agents or people like that? Or like how do you decide like this is the next story that I want to tell?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's tough. That's tough, and it's tougher recently because I feel like of late, there's just been so many stories, and like I said, I wonder that and I don't say that as a good thing because I think the reality that I'm sort of facing is I struggle to go deeper in each one of them, and that's a thing that I really want to do, and so I think what I'm sort of doing now is I'm birthing ideas and at the same time holding them with an open hand and going, I don't know for what time this is or whether at all, whether it was just something that needed to be exercised through me and just needed to come out as a purge on the page, but was never meant to see the screen or in a different way. And that within itself was the exercise as a writer. And as a person, there was therapy that needed to happen through that process. But there's a stack of things that I think have shape to them. And I'm trying to sort of like read the moment, read the room for which one has life on it. As opposed to also the thing that I've realized is when you sort of like go, okay, this is next, and then this follows that, and then that follows that. It just doesn't work in that order.
And in that regard, when you decide, all right, this is what I'm pursuing next, has there ever been a moment while in the midst of pursuing it, you lose inspiration in that project?
Yeah. I mean, it's happening with something that I did now just because I think sometimes you suffer heartbreak over money not coming in for this thing, and then there's a project that I was trying to do and we had most of the money and it died during the strikes and sort of during the pandemic. And I was like, okay, that's not probably meant to happen. And then it sort of came back and I've not allowed myself to sort of mentally dig back into it until now where it might be more of a reality. So I think we all need to have our own sort of tempered relationship with our creative, knowing how much things need to stuck their claw or teeth into us in order to get a hold of us, in order for us to be disciplined enough to pull it out. And we need to do that work. And again, sometimes it's just sometimes the end result of that is just getting it onto the page. That's it. That's what it needed to be. And sometimes it's all the way through to the end. But you may write something that you don't shoot for 10 years and being comfortable with knowing, okay, I'm not going to invest myself emotionally now so much into this that if it doesn't happen, my heart breaks.
Right.
And then I can't write anything because I don't believe in the system and I don't believe in filmmaking anymore because it's so corrupt because this person, we all can get into that trap.
I mean, that could tie into the point of you thinking that this project is going to be the next big thing for you.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. So it's holding, it's being a good vessel, right? So that's what I really love about Rick Rubin, who talks about we're just vessels. I love that idea because I think that's true. Sometimes what also happens is you create something and you look at the thing you created and it's like, oh, wow, did that come from me? Not like, oh, wow, that's so great. But, oh, wow, I didn't know I had that story in me.
Right.
And sometimes the story sort of speaks back to you and you learn from it. Because that's happened to me. I did a music video for a band called Aya and I didn't even know what I wanted to say. And then when I saw the final result, I was sort of able to go, oh, that's what it was teaching me. And it was all about our phone and it was all about the story of Adam and Eve, so to speak. And I think knowing knowing when to go, that's really important, because if you keep going, accept it, then I think you sort of get into the trap of, well, that thing is just going to break your heart. And actually now you're sort of holding on to it as if it was your thing, your baby. And actually you were just supposed to be a steward, bringing it to life, and then and a vessel, and allowing it to sort of come off you, but it's not yours. Don't hold on to it too tightly, because it's not yours anyway. Again, maybe I'm over spiritualizing, but I mean, even these tools help me deal with my own work, and not to become too sort of navel gazing in it, because it's easy to sort of hold on to something. It's like, this is mine,
right.
But then all your emotions get hung up on it. Now, when the thing doesn't go your way, your mind and your mental health is sort of spiraling out of control. And so, I mean, all these tools, I think these spiritual tools are just helpful mentally,
And that goes, again, that ties, I think, also into the fact of, being so deeply focused and, wanting to do that thing that you forget about the other things in your life as well.
Right.
Which,
it's so easy to happen.
That's a challenge.
Yeah. Super easy to happen. Even the good things can become bad things. Meaning, I hear a lot of people talk about passion projects, like, oh yeah, it's like, we should do that. And they're struggling to do that. Struggling to prioritize that. And,
struggling to prioritize doing the passion project?
Yeah.
Because they might be too busy with, or they might not be.
Or too enamored. Enamored with the money that comes from commercials.
Right.
And
they might not think it's as important.
They really want to do it.
Yeah.
But yes, I guess ultimately they don't think it's worth.
Holds the same value, potentially, as like.
Yeah, I think, our attention and our focus and where we put our resources shows us what the things that we value, probably. But I do know a lot of people that talk about wanting to do passion projects, but find it really hard. I think we may have spoken about this last time, but I think the conversation that I don't hear often is, it's all well and good to want to do passion projects. And I understand that, I do that. But for me, there's sort of a trifecta of things we give our attention to: the work that makes us money, the work that builds our career, passion projects, or music videos or whatever, and our families. The things that anchor us, that sort of tether us to reality. Not a lot of people talk about the third. Like, a lot of people, I find, a lot of people do sort of talk about passion projects, but not a lot of people sort of real talk about the cost.
Right.
The cost of even doing your passion project. Not to mention the cost of, making the feature, shooting the commercial, shooting the music video. But, and you know what, maybe that's fine, because it is private. But yeah, it is something that actually, there's a lot of stake in what we do, not creatively, personally.
I think I'm looking for maybe some sort of like advice in a way that maybe you could share to people that are interested in doing passion projects. Because like you said, there's a few different, aspects. One's the career, one's passion projects, one's family. And those two correlate a lot. I mean, all three of them do. But do you have advice for people that are that want to actually make their own passion project? And what are some things to consider when doing so?
I'm trying to think really, like, what is it that drives me to do passion projects? Sometimes it's twofold. I guess the one part of it is strategic, which isn't really not the important part, but I get that. And I think probably that's where a lot of people will sort of come to the table wanting to like do something in the passion work because they can't do it in the commercial work, but they want to do it in the commercial work. And as we know, this business, if they can't see it on the reel, they're not going to give you the job. So I'll often that's a motivation. For me, oftentimes there's something that I want to express or say that I don't get to say in commercials, because commercials have to sort of serve a selling end,
Sure.
or a sales end, or a marketing end. And sometimes I just want to tell a story of something that I believe in, or express an emotion that I can't express. Anger. Like when I did my first music video, I was actually on a commercial that I didn't love doing, and I was super frustrated. And I wrote this story for this music video called Mr. Martyr, sort of out of my anger, because I sort of felt boxed in by doing car commercials and not the sort of the stuff that I really wanted to do, which was a little bit more humanist and raw. And I was like, you know what, I'm just frustrated. I'm going to write this. And so that was sort of a double whammy. It's like, actually, it was coming out of a truthful sort of emotional place. And it was just, again, maybe a part of my curiosity that I wanted to exercise. And then it also ended up also being something quite strategic, in that it did open a part of my career. All of a sudden I wasn't seeing so many car things, but I was seeing more like sports stuff and like real stories. And I think just navigating your own sort of reasons for why you want to do it and what does it mean to you is really important, because you have to do an assessment of what are you willing to put in to make that happen.
Right. What are you willing to sacrifice?
What are you willing to sacrifice? Both of the time that you're not going to be doing a commercial, and then which is sort of you're always thinking, well, if I'm not doing the commercial, I don't have something new for my reel, and also I don't have money coming in. I'm actually putting money into the project, and so I think people just sort of have to weigh up like that reality, and then I think I won't probably be following my own advice here, or I don't think I'll follow my own advice with this next statement, is try and make it for as simple and as inexpensive as you can. Top line, I don't follow my own advice there. But, and this is the hard thing, also don't compromise too much. You have to compromise all the time on when you're in commercials and music videos. And sometimes it becomes, you can be very excited sometimes going into a commercial or music video with an idea that you had, but then that idea gets compromised through, they've got these notes, the agency and the client has these notes.
A watered down version.
Watered down for logistical, creative, and monetary purposes. It gets watered down. And so when you're doing a passion project, try not to water the thing down. And sometimes that may mean, what it often means for me, is putting more money in to make it what it can be, or what I want it to be. Because this is often what I find with passion projects is, as soon as you've spent that first bit of money, now the money is spent. You're not getting that money back.
Right.
And so if the film's going to suck and you've spent money, no good. That's no good. But if you can maybe spend a little bit more money, because sometimes this just happens in passion projects, if you can spend a little bit more money, but it'll be great, that may be worth it. Because you just don't want it to suck, or you can't stand behind it because it's not creatively what you want it to be. And this happens often. It hasn't happened with me, thank God. But it does happen often. I hear countless stories of this director isn't putting that piece of work out or this piece of work out like a passion project because it's just not everything it could be. And sometimes, you know what? I'm not disparaging other directors for doing that. I get what that's like. But I think sometimes you just have to go, maybe it's just worth spending a little bit more money or asking another favor to try and finish it so that it can be, or to try and make it what it can be. And again, it is a luxury to be able to go, this is how much it was initially going to cost, and it's just like, it's blown up. And And the luxury sometimes is your kid's college fund.
I think you told me a story last time where you called your wife. You're like, "Ah, I think we're going to add more money or something like that."
Yeah, I did that twice on that project. And I did it probably 3 times on the short film that I shot in Ukraine. And, you know, man, yeah, look, it's heartbreaking because, just to use the short film as an example, I submitted it to a film festival that I really wanted it to get into. It didn't. Boom. And it hit me hard. And I've never really done film festivals before, you know? So I didn't understand the name of the game, just the way that it's going to go, which is just rejection, rejection, rejection. Yeah. I mean, if you're awesome and your film's amazing and you have CAA or UTA, all these companies attached and you've got big names on it, then great. Then, you know, those people are going to get into film festivals. I'd never done a film and put it into a film festival. So I just always saw, you know, Sundance, Berlin, Venice, and I would see my friends get into it. I was like, oh, like,
it's doable.
Yeah. Not only is it doable, like part of me was like, oh, this should be easy. Like, how arrogant to think
Did
like that.
you think maybe like, oh, I'm next, maybe because of all your friends?
Yeah. Totally. You think, oh no, this should be easy. Like, because again, you're exposed to it on social media.
Right.
So you're like, oh, this is going to be easy. And then denied. And now you're going, oh, am I shit? Am I that bad? You know, like, and I can laugh about it now. I couldn't laugh about it when it was happening. I mean, things in my household, because of me and my ego, was not great. It was a lot of self-pity. And self-pity does no one good. It doesn't do you any good. It doesn't do me any good when I'm doing it. It doesn't do your family any good. And I just wasn't. I think maybe I was just too cocky, thinking like, oh, I could do this. It could be, you know, it could be fine. It could be accepted. Or it could. I think it might. But if you think about the odds, it's one. I think they take 1 in 15 films or something like that, and Cannes takes 1 in 10. You know, so what was I thinking? You know, the film now got into apparently, like, I sort of gave up hope on the film. And when you submit the film, you submit on like Film Freeway.
Yeah, for sure.
Or Film Freeway, I think gets used mostly for like UK and US ones, but then Short Film Depot is another one that gets used mostly for like French ones and maybe some European ones. And I had submitted a bunch on Film Freeway.
And those also cost money too.
Yeah.
It's expensive.
Yeah. Oh, yes, the money factor of it is something. But I submitted one on Short Film Depot to this one festival in France, and I forgot about it, and it just got denied. I got into a couple of like interesting ones, but not like the Sundances and I took a knock, you know, like an ego knock. And now I just recently got into this one that I'd forgotten about, and it's having its life. And weirdly enough, I'm like, oh, you know what? Like, maybe that was the journey that I needed to go on to learn that I'm not in control. Again, so much of our like human and spiritual journeys are just, you're not in control. You can't dictate what the outcome of something is going to be. Obviously, you can, you know, have your wants and your desires for it, but you're just not in control. And surrender.
Right.
And surrender your ego, your little fragile ego. And I feel like that was sort of the journey, you know, and who knows, like, if this festival is going to be good for it. I think I'm just sort of learning to be faithful to the process. And the result will have its own journey. I cannot control that. You know, trust the process, not the product.
Right.
The product is out of my control. How people view it, I view my film now with like, I had a lot to learn, but I'm also grateful I did it. I'm grateful I told that story. Technically, there's a lot that I learned from it that's going to help me with what I do next. So I don't want to look at it with regret or despondency. I'm sort of looking at it like, no, it was a good step, a good road process wise that I needed to go through.
I'm curious what you think of this quote. I think it kind of goes, I don't know if I'm quoting it, but it's by Rick Rubin, I think in his book, The Audience Comes Last. And I think he says some other things, but essentially he doesn't create anything for an audience at all. It seems like you kind of relate to that.
Yeah, weirdly enough, I sort of like that idea. You've heard this a million times too, and it's perhaps cliche and trite, but if I care about it, surely then someone else will care about it. And I do think that's experientially now, I can say that there is a truth to that. It's weird. In my creative journey, I saw two people do it in another way. Like will.i.am would create. I did a commercial with him like years ago, and he was just talking to us as he was talking about his process, like what he would do. He'd sort of create a track in Ableton or even on his iPad, create the beat, and he'd go test it out, take it to a club, load it up, and see how people would react, and then go back into the studio and tweak and adjust his creation to how people would react. And interesting,
right?
Amazing. It works, obviously works for him. It's just, I don't work that way. I think even Kanye West, I don't know exactly how Kanye West actually works, sorry, but that was the experience with will.i.am, and it was so interesting because I was going, oh wow, I just don't work that way. It has to work for me first, right? Before it works for anyone else, I
think I have just two more questions. The first, I know we've talked about it throughout this, but in a more confined way. What do you see success for you right now in your life in this moment of where you are versus how do you think you've perceived success years ago?
I think the definition of success for a lot of people in our field looks like a Grammy for music video, best music video of the award, or an Oscar, or like that's pinnacle, right?
Right.
And down from that is gets into this festival, gets into that festival. And I get that. I understand that is our definitions of success. Makes sense. But I also think that if I sort of live my life navigating those, they're almost like they're on the other side of product even. They're like way more out of our control than even the final product.
Right.
And so you're sort of grasping at things that like you have no control over. And if you're building all your emotion and your sense of value and your sense of identity on something that you have no control over, good luck. That's pretty dangerous. And I think I've sort of recognized that as another, chew the meat through osmosis of what my parents have taught me. They've been really good at just teaching me like what's valuable. And I mean, I try and live that way, but it's hard. I mean, there's sort of always the human draw. There's always the ego draw to validate yourself through thinking about the Oscar and thinking about whatever. But I think honestly, if I can have a journey, sort of like the heroes that I have mentioned, if I can have a journey doing what I love and have a life that hasn't fell into pieces, a journey that's like marked with curiosity, but also there's love and togetherness in my family, I think I'd be pretty happy. And I will say it's for a lot of people, it's not easy, and it isn't easy. It's not, I don't think it's easy. I mean, we have real conversations about, is it worth it? Sometimes we do have that conversation. Is what I do for a living, is the creative journey sort of worth it? Like the tax that I can put on my mental well-being, my wife's mental well-being, because she's also in the arts. Like sometimes should we just like really simplify our lives? I mean, sometimes the monastic life is really appealing, you know, and there is a part of me that's sort of drawn to that. I just don't know if that's maybe the right way to live, you know. I think to be salt and light, so to speak, is there's a reason why we're sort of in the world we find ourselves, you know. And sometimes I feel like the tendency to remove myself just for my own ease and just for my own sort of mental well-being. But I also sort of understand that like there's a responsibility to be with people and to like love on people, like in a St. Francis of Assisi way, you know? Yeah.
Love that. One of my favorite things. I used to think that I hated people, but I think part of why I love filmmaking so much is the fact that I get to be around my friends.
Right.
It's honestly one of my favorite parts.
Yeah. I agree. Yeah, you get to be around your friends. You get to create with your friends. I mean,
it's like a dream. It really is.
That's part of why I love passion projects so much. More so than commercial projects, because sometimes with commercial projects, so many people are like, you're hiring this people because the agency wants that person, and you're hiring this person because for whatever political reason. But when it's a passion project, first of all, you're mostly working with friends. And if you're not working with friends, you're working with people who really want to be there. And now you're meeting new friends who you're sharing. I mean, if it's your project or if it's someone else's project, you're sort of sharing a love for the thing and the love for each other. And that feeling like you're a kid again on a camping trip, going to, I don't know, make something together or share. I mean, I live for that. Honestly, that's one of my favorite experiences. I just did that coming from the desert. And we had a main shoot. We had like a crew of 10 to 12 people. And we were just like...
It's like a perfect size.
It was amazing.
Yeah, it's great.
Then we did like a little reshoot, and it was me at this time. And then this time I took my son with me, my 9-year-old son. And he was just like holding the leaf blower. I had camera or a DP and the 2 actors and a loader. That's it. So everyone sort of fit in one vehicle. And we were just out in the middle of the desert. And I just wanted to give my son the experience of like, this is what it takes. And then hopefully when he sort of sees the end result, it feels huge, but was made so small, and hopefully it connects, you know? And yeah, I just love that part of the process. You're right. I mean, I consider myself an introvert. I think I'm an introvert. I don't actually love, like I said, I don't like networking, and I don't like being social in that way, but I love shoots. I love connecting with someone one-on-one. Like I've always been, you know, a friend of 3 people as opposed to a friend of 50 people. And sometimes when a set is really intimate and I really get to know someone and we really get to connect, the best. It's the best.
Did your son love it?
Yeah.
Was that his first time on like a shoot?
It was his first time, like not just coming for like an hour visit, but like spending the day, spending the night, you know, helping.
He got the full
deal. Not in scale,
sure,
but in
could be intimidating,
but in responsibility and but also in fun. He got the full deal in terms of like how fun it could be, you know, and I love that. It's my favorite thing. I get very emotional when I think of the people that come together to make something, and you know, it's a privilege. First of all, it really is a privilege, I want to keep treating the projects, even if they become bigger in size or if they become a feature or a bigger doc or something, as much as I can. The projects that sort of come from me, keep holding them in that sort of, when I say fragile, I just mean I don't want to mess with that too much, because I want to maintain that that intimacy amongst each other and intimacy around the work that you're doing, that sometimes is not there in commercial work, because you just gotta go,
I think that's it. Amazing.
All right.
Thank you, man.
Pleasure, man.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Hopefully you enjoyed today's episode. I'll see you next time. Peace out. MusicBed is one of the only brands that I truly trust with my filmmaking projects and my podcast. What you're listening to in the background is also from MusicBed. When designing the intro and outro to my podcast, it was really important to find the right song that fit the aesthetic, vibe, and emotion that I wanted to convey for my podcast. Not only does MusicBed provide a great selection of music, it also helps with storytelling. MusicBed has the largest roster of independent artists and is curated just for filmmakers and creatives. So take your projects and films to the next level with MusicBed. Hear the difference for yourself and sign up for a free account. Use code CARLO at checkout to receive 1 month free when you purchase an annual subscription. Thank you, MusicBed. So thank you for tuning into another episode of the Creative Gap Podcast. Hopefully you enjoyed today's episode, and if you did, there are a ton of other episodes for you to listen to as well. Check us out on Spotify, Google Play, Apple Podcasts, wherever you want to get your podcast, you can find it. And now that you're watching this, you could also watch the full video podcast on YouTube. Also, be sure to check us out on Instagram at Creative Gap for future updates, upcoming guests, and a lot of short clips. And if you want to support the podcast in a deeper way, feel free to join our Patreon community. And for those of you who already joined the Patreon community, thank you. And for those of you who are new to the show, welcome. Hopefully you enjoy it. And for those of you who have been here for a long time, thank you. So that's all we got for you today. Hopefully you enjoyed the episode. We'll see you next time. Peace out.